They took my wedding dress, my savings, and even the venue I paid for. My own mother handed it all to my sister as if I never existed. My husband stood silent, my father shrugged, and the world was told I was too broke to marry. But they forgot one thing. I had every receipt, every contract, every forged signature. And while they prepared to toast at a wedding built on theft, I pressed upload. The air in Austin was heavy with late spring warmth when I pulled into the small parking lot outside the boutique. The glass windows reflected rows of gowns, silk and lace, glowing under the lights. I had imagined this moment for months, the final fitting of the dress I had saved for, through every overtime shift at Brightwave Media, every skipped vacation, every careful deposit into my savings. The venue was secured, the deposits paid, and for once I felt the ground beneath my feet was steady. Inside, the scent of lavender and starch floated through the room. I smiled faintly as the clerk greeted me, promising to bring out my gown. My chest lifted with anticipation. I could already see myself in the mirror, the fabric flowing as I walked toward Michael, the life I had fought for, finally taking shape. Then laughter cut through the air. My head turned before I could stop it. Hannah stepped out from behind the curtain, her hands smoothing the bodice of a gown that froze my blood. My gown. She spun once radiant, the train curling behind her, like it belonged to her all along. My breath snagged. I whispered her name, but she only tilted her head with a smile too polished to be innocent. Before I could speak again, my mother entered, clipboard in hand, giving instructions to the tailor. Her eyes landed on me, cool and steady. "That is my dress," I managed, voice thin but firm. Mom touched my arm, her tone gentle on the surface, sharp underneath. "Emily, we thought this through. Hannah is getting married first. It makes sense for her to have it. You will understand." I blinked. Understand. Every receipt was signed by me. Every dollar came from my account. My throat burned. Michael stood near the door, watching, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His silence was louder than any answer. "You let this happen," I said, more accusation than question. He shifted, clearing his throat. "It's done, Emily. Let it go." The words slammed into me harder than Hannah's smirk. My husband, the man who had watched me work late nights, count every penny, was telling me to surrender what was mine. The clerk hesitated, glancing between us, but Mom waved her away. "The order has already been transferred," she said. "It is under Hannah's name now." Transferred. As if my future could be shifted like paperwork on a desk. Hannah twirled again, her voice light as glass. "You will still have your day, Emily. You always do." The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing in. I stepped back, steadying myself against the counter. My heart pounded as I searched Michael's face for even a flicker of regret. Instead, I caught something else, a quick glance between him and Mom, a silent exchange I was not meant to see. The satin rustled as Hannah adjusted the skirt, admiring her reflection. My mother's eyes gleamed with pride, her hand resting on Hannah's shoulder as if crowning her. I swallowed, forcing the lump in my throat down. My wedding had been stripped from me, stitched to someone else's body, and the people closest to me had let it happen. The boutique fell quiet, except for the faint scratching of a pen, as the clerk finalized paperwork behind the counter. I caught sight of the forms, a different signature scrawled where mine should have been. My name crossed out, Hannah's written in bold ink. My pulse quickened, the edges of betrayal sharpening into something colder. If they could erase me on paper this easily, what else were they planning to take? I drove home that evening with my hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles ached. Streetlights blurred past the windshield, each one flickering like a warning. The silence in the car pressed in on me until I finally turned off the radio, unable to stand even the hum of static. All I could see was Hannah's reflection in that mirror, and my name scratched out on paper. At the house, my father Robert sat in his armchair reading the newspaper, the same worn recliner he had claimed every night since I was a child. He looked up when I entered, his glasses sliding slightly down his nose, then lowered his eyes again. No questions, no concern. It was as if what had happened hours earlier was too small to mention. "Dad," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Did you know they gave Hannah my dress?" He folded the paper once, not to respond but to mark his place. His shoulders lifted in a tired shrug. Your sister is younger, he said finally, as if that explained everything. These things happen. I wanted to laugh, but it came out sharp, almost bitter. These things happen. That was the same tone he used when I was a girl, and Hannah was caught sneaking out while I was scolded for not stopping her. He had always acted as if favoritism was natural, as if the balance of our family depended on my silence. My chest tightened with an old familiar ache. I remembered birthdays, forgotten awards, ignored dinners, where my seat was always the one closest to the kitchen door, while Hannah basked in the center. Somehow those small humiliations felt heavier now that they had stolen something I had earned with years of work. I retreated upstairs to my bedroom, needing space to breathe. My phone buzzed with messages, but not from my family. It was my coworker Ethan. He had started in my department last year, ambitious and eager to prove himself. I opened his text. "Is it true you lost your wedding because you ran out of money?" I froze, my throat closing, as if someone had gripped it. The rumor had spread beyond the walls of my family's house. My hands trembled as I typed back. "Where did you hear that?" He replied almost instantly. "People are talking at the office. Someone said your mom told a cousin, who told a friend. I did not want to believe it, but everyone knows you work too much. I just wanted to check on you." Heat rushed to my face. They were not content with taking my dress and venue. Now they were chipping away at the life I had built outside of them. Only a week earlier, I had been promoted to marketing director, a role I had chased for years, proof that my sacrifices meant something. Yet here I was being painted as a woman too broke to afford her own vows. I dialed Ethan. He picked up after the second ring, his tone cautious. "Emily, I did not mean to upset you." I steadied my voice. "Listen to me, I was promoted. I make more than enough to pay for my own wedding. Do not believe a word of what they are saying." He exhaled loudly. "I figured it did not sound like you, but you know how people talk." I thanked him for calling, but when I hung up, the weight in my chest only grew. If Ethan had heard, then the rest of my colleagues had too. My reputation, the very thing I had fought for, was being chipped away by whispers. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed certificate of my promotion on the desk. The irony burned. I had finally claimed recognition at work, only to have my own family smear me as incapable. Downstairs, I heard the muffled sound of Hannah's laughter. She must have come by after leaving the boutique. My mother's voice joined hers, light and pleased, as if nothing in the world was wrong. My father said nothing, of course. Silence was his favorite refuge. I pressed my palms to my face, my heart pounding harder with each muffled laugh. If they could rewrite my story so easily for strangers, then what else were they preparing to erase next? The following Saturday, I walked into the restaurant where Hannah's engagement party was already in full swing. Music spilled out through the open doors, and laughter rose above the clinking of glasses. I had not been given an invitation, just a passing mention from my mother that everyone would be there. I told myself I was going only to keep the peace, but a pit formed in my stomach the moment I stepped inside. The room glowed with soft lights strung across the ceiling tables, lined with flowers, and guests dressed in pastel shades. Hannah stood in the center like a starlet, her smile wide, as friends gathered around her. She wore a white cocktail dress that hugged her figure, clearly styled to remind everyone that she was the bride. When her eyes found me, her smile sharpened. She raised her glass and said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "Emily, you actually came. I thought you would be too busy working late." A ripple of laughter spread through the guests. My cheeks burned. I forced a polite smile and made my way toward an empty seat near the back, but Hannah's voice carried again. "Maybe she is just here to take notes for her next marketing campaign. She does not really need a wedding, she has her spreadsheets." Some guests chuckled awkwardly. Others looked away, but Hannah's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Before I could respond, my mother Linda appeared at her side, her hand resting on Hannah's arm, as if she were polishing a jewel. She called out so everyone could hear. "Your sister has always been focused on herself. She does not understand family sacrifice the way you do, Hannah." My chest tightened. I wanted to leave, but my feet rooted to the floor. Michael arrived late, slipping in beside my mother, his tie loosened, as if he had come from anywhere but work. He caught my eye, then glanced away. When someone asked why I looked upset, he shrugged and said, "Emily has always been dramatic." My throat closed around words that refused to come. I stood trying to keep my voice steady. "I am not dramatic. I worked for what was mine." The room stilled for a moment, the music softening in the background, but Hannah broke the silence with a laugh like crystal. "Come on, Emily, you do not need all that. You have your career. That is all you ever cared about." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the murmur of agreement from Linda and Michael drowned me out. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others openly staring. It felt like I was on trial in front of everyone I had ever known. The weight of humiliation pressed down harder with each passing second until I finally turned away. I made my way toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, desperate for air. As I passed the coat room, I heard voices, low at first, then sharper. My mother's tone cut through. "After the wedding, Emily will not have a place in this family anymore." Hannah's laugh followed, quiet but certain. "She will fade out like she always should have." The words froze me in place. My breath caught as if the walls themselves had collapsed on my chest. For years I had feared being invisible to them, but now I heard it spoken as a plan. I pressed my hand against the doorframe, forcing myself not to push inside, not to confront them here, not when every guest was only a few feet away. My pulse hammered so hard I could barely hear the music anymore. I turned back toward the main room, the taste of bile sharp in my mouth, realizing they were not just taking my wedding. They were preparing to erase me entirely. And if they were willing to do it so openly, then I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The following Monday, I drove across town to Rachel's office, a modest building tucked between a bank and a coffee shop. She had been my closest friend since college, the one who had seen me grind through late nights and broken relationships, and now she was the only person I trusted to help me untangle the mess my family had created. I walked in carrying a folder of contracts receipts and the only copy of my venue agreement. My hands shook as I set them on her desk. Rachel studied my face before opening the folder. "What happened, Em?" "They took everything I said," my voice sharper than I intended. "The dress, the venue, even my savings. And I think they forged documents to do it." Her eyes narrowed. She flipped through the contracts, her fingers tracing the ink at the bottom of the venue agreement. Then she reached for a magnifier from her drawer. After a moment, she looked up. "Emily, this signature is not yours." I leaned over the desk, my heart pounding. My name was there, but the slant of the letters was wrong, the loops uneven. Whoever had signed it had not even bothered to practice. Rachel slid another paper across to me, a printed invoice from the boutique. "Hannah Carter." The line read in bold, replacing my name. The deposit amount was identical to the one I had made weeks earlier. "They just erased me," I whispered. Rachel's tone steadied. "They erased you on paper, but that does not mean they own anything. You signed a prenup before marrying Michael, remember. Every asset you had before and during the marriage remains solely yours. That includes the accounts you used for these deposits. Michael has no legal claim." The memory struck me clearly. 4 years ago, I had sat across from a different lawyer, Patricia Miller, who had insisted I protect myself. Michael had been careless signing without reading, more interested in planning a honeymoon than discussing legal documents. At the time, I thought it was tedious. Now it was my shield. "So what do?" I asked. Rachel tapped the folder. "Keep every receipt, every email, every screenshot. The moment they try to use what is yours, you will have proof." I nodded, my throat tight. Proof. It sounded simple, but it felt like the only thing keeping me from disappearing. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her voice softer. "They are trying to push you out of your own life. Do not let them." I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder with careful hands. The betrayal still burned, but now it had edges I could hold. Evidence, signatures, a prenup they could not undo. As I left her office, the air outside felt heavier, the hum of traffic sharper. I clutched the folder against my chest, each step steadier than the last. They thought I would surrender quietly, that I would let them write me out, as if I had never mattered. but I had the receipts, and I was going to use them. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into full conversations I could not escape. At the office, two coworkers lowered their voices the moment I walked past the break room. One of them still held a phone in her hand, my name glowing on the screen. When I entered the elevator with another colleague, she smiled too brightly and said she had heard I canceled my own wedding out of jealousy. I kept my face calm, but inside the words cut deep. At home, the neighborhood was no better. Mrs. Turner from across the street stopped me at the mailbox, her tone dripping with sympathy. She said it was a shame that I could not be happy for Hannah, that sisters should lift each other up. I nodded once and walked away before the anger cracked through my voice. One evening, as I carried groceries to my car, a man I had not seen in years called my name. It was Daniel Reed, an old classmate from high school who had stayed in town. He leaned against his truck with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "I heard you tried to ruin Hannah's big day," he said. "Is it true you are trying to tear your family apart?" The bags cut into my hands as I stared at him. "No," I said, forcing each word. "I did not ruin anything. They took what was mine." He raised his brows, unconvinced. "That is not what everyone says." I set the bags down in the trunk and closed it firmly. "Then maybe everyone is listening to the wrong people." His smirk faded slightly, but he did not apologize. I drove away with my pulse hammering in my ears, humiliation clinging to me like smoke. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the folder of receipts and contracts open beside me. Proof was one thing, but proof meant nothing if no one ever saw it. They were winning the war of perception, turning me into the bitter sister, the one who could not let go. A knock on the door startled me. When I opened it, I found Mark Henderson, another old classmate. He had left town for years and only recently moved back. We exchanged a hesitant smile before he spoke. "I heard what happened, Em. I know the rumors, but I also know you. If you want people to understand, you need to show them." I frowned. "Show them how?" He stepped inside, glancing at the papers spread across my table. Through video, he said simply, "TikTok, Instagram, whatever platform works. People believe what they see, not what they hear in whispers." The idea made my stomach twist. Exposing my family publicly felt dangerous, almost cruel, but Mark's eyes were steady. He added, "They already dragged your name through the mud. At least tell your side." I looked down at the receipts, the fake signature, the invoice with Hannah's name bold, where mine should have been. My throat tightened. Maybe he was right. Mark set his phone on the table and opened the camera. "Just talk," he encouraged. "Say what happened." I hesitated, then pressed record. My hands trembled in my lap, my voice catching in my throat. "They took everything," I whispered, my eyes burning. "My dress, my savings, the venue. But I still have the truth." The words broke something inside me. My eyes filled, but I forced the tears down. Mark stopped recording, his expression serious. "That he said is what people need to hear." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, a dull fire building in my chest. If they wanted to rewrite me as a villain, then I would rewrite myself as something they could not erase. I stared at the phone still glowing on the table, realizing the first step had already begun, and the next would change everything. The next morning, I carried the folder back into Rachel's office. She pushed her glasses up her nose and studied me carefully as I laid the documents on her desk again. Her tone was measured but urgent. "Emily, if you release this publicly, they could sue you for defamation. Even if you are telling the truth, you have to be prepared for the backlash." I pressed my palms against the edge of her desk. "What choice do I have? They already made me the villain." Rachel leaned forward. "You have evidence, yes, but once you put this out there, you cannot take it back. It will follow you at work, online, everywhere. I need you to think before you jump." Her words rattled around in my chest. I knew she was right, but silence had already cost me too much. I left her office with the folder pressed against me like armor, the city traffic roaring in my ears. That night, my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. "If you make a scene, you will lose this family forever. Do not embarrass us." I stared at the glowing screen, her words pulsing like a threat. For a moment, I imagined replying, begging her to see me, to defend me just once. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced for decades, stiffened. Mark sat across from me at the kitchen table. He raised a brow when he saw the look on my face. "Who was that?" "My mother," I said flatly. "She is warning me to stay quiet." He shook his head. "They already erased you, Emily. What else can they take?" The weight of his words sank in. My chest tightened, my thoughts swirling between fear and fury. I thought about the co-workers whispering behind closed doors, about the neighbors eyeing me with pity, about Hannah in my gown, smiling as if she had earned it. If I stayed silent, I was finished. The phone buzzed again with another message. This time I did not even read it. I opened the settings and blocked the number, my thumb pressing the screen with finality. A shaky breath escaped me. Mark's voice was steady. "So what now?" I lifted the folder, the receipts, and forged signatures inside. "Now," I said, "we show them what they did." For the first time in weeks, the fear inside me felt smaller than the anger. The decision had been made. My story would not end in whispers. It would end where everyone could see it, and where they could no longer pretend it never happened. Mark set up his tripod in my living room, the glow of a single lamp casting soft light across the table where I had spread the documents. The receipts, the forged signature on the venue, contract, the invoice with Hannah's name replacing mine, all laid out in order. My hands shook slightly as I arranged them, not from doubt anymore, but from the weight of what we were about to do. When the camera blinked red, I drew a breath and steadied my voice. "My name is Emily Carter. This was supposed to be my wedding dress, my venue, my savings." I held up each piece of paper one by one, the dates clear, the handwriting wrong, the transfers obvious. My family erased me from my own wedding. I said, my throat tightening, "But I will not let them erase the truth." Mark zoomed closer as I unfolded the boutique invoice. "Here is the payment I made. And here is the same bill changed into my sister's name." I lifted the venue agreement, the signature sloppy, not even close to mine. "This is fraud." He lowered the camera slightly. "Do you want to stop?" "No," I answered quickly. "I need them to see." The recording ended with me staring directly into the lens. "They took everything from me, but I still have the truth. We uploaded it just after midnight." My finger hovered for only a second before I pressed post. The video went live, and suddenly there was no turning back. Mark stayed with me, both of us watching the view count tick upward. At first it was dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. By 3 in the morning, the video had passed 50,000 views. By 5, over 200,000. Notifications exploded across my phone, comments pouring in. "Stay strong, Emily. This is disgusting. They cannot get away with this." Some asked for more proof. Others promised they had shared it with friends. By sunrise, the hashtag Justice for Emily was climbing the trending page. Local bloggers picked it up, then the Austin Chronicle, then a news site that pushed the story wider than I had ever imagined. I had not slept, but adrenaline kept me upright. Mark leaned back against the couch, grinning in disbelief. "You realize this is everywhere now?" I nodded, staring at the screen where messages scrolled faster than I could read them. My phone buzzed non-stop, some numbers I recognized, most I did not. I ignored every one. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, and with it came the first wave of fallout. A text from Ethan, my coworker, appeared. "Everyone in the office saw the video. People are on your side." I exhaled a shaky breath. For the first time in weeks, the lies were losing ground. By mid-morning, word spread to the wedding itself. Guests began messaging me screenshots of group chats, whispers about the video, speculation that the Carter family had been hiding something. Several people posted publicly that they would not attend Hannah's ceremony. The numbers of cancellations grew so quickly that even I felt stunned. I imagined my mother's face when she realized her perfect image was collapsing before her. I pictured Hannah scrolling through the comments, each one peeling away the flawless mask she had built. The walls that had closed in around me were now crumbling around them. I stood at the window, the city moving briskly outside, while inside my phone vibrated with fresh notifications. The momentum was unstoppable now. But as much as part of me felt vindicated, another part braced for the storm that was about to hit the wedding that morning. By the time I arrived outside the hotel, the parking lot was already buzzing with tension. Guests clustered near the entrance, phones in hand, their voices rising in disbelief as they compared what they had seen online with what they were about to walk into. I stayed at a distance, unseen among the flow of people, my heart steady in my chest. Inside the ballroom, the decorations glittered, chandeliers casting gold light over rows of white chairs. Hannah stood near the altar, pale beneath her heavy makeup, her hands trembling as she clutched a bouquet. Linda whispered frantically in her ear, her eyes darting toward every corner of the room as if she could still control the damage. Then the murmur spread through the guests like a wave. Phones were raised, screens lit with my video, the hashtag scrolling across them. Faces turned toward Hannah with disbelief, some with pity, others with disgust. The groom. Matthew stood rigid at the front, his jaw clenched. His father, Gregory Allen, a man with the kind of authority that carried in silence, stepped forward. The music faltered to a stop. Gregory's voice carried across the room. "This ceremony will not continue. My family does not stand with deceit." A collective gasp filled the air. Hannah's bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering across the carpet. Linda cried out, begging him to reconsider, insisting it was a misunderstanding. Matthew shook his head, stepping back from Hannah as though she were a stranger. Guests began to rise from their chairs. Some whispered apologies to the Allens, others left without looking back. The carefully arranged seating, the towering cakes, the flawless decorations meant nothing now. The perfect picture my family had built collapsed in minutes. From my place near the doorway, I watched Hannah sink to the floor, her dress pooling around her like a curtain falling at the end of a play. My mother knelt beside her, shielding her from the stares, her sobs echoing off the marble walls. Michael tried to speak, stammering excuses about not knowing, but the crowd silenced him with sharp glares and muttered curses. The humiliation they had planned for me was theirs now, played out under the gaze of 200 witnesses. I stood straighter, my shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. They had stripped me of a dress, of savings, of a venue, but they could not strip me of truth. That truth had filled every phone in that room, had toppled their lies in an instant. For years, I had let their silence define me. Not anymore. As I turned to leave the ballroom, the noise behind me rose into chaos, voices colliding in anger and disbelief. Outside, the spring air felt sharper, cleaner. I walked down the steps, each stride steady, knowing this was only the beginning of something larger than a ruined wedding.